You can record. Okay, science of diving. We're back. All right, so the same things apply. Hopefully, we're going to keep things on track this time, 60 minutes. Supplemental material to the online course materials that you're going through. Roll your cameras, ask questions via chat. At the end, we'll have the after party. Again, we'll unmute everybody and we can talk about things that maybe are on your mind throughout. And what else? I think we've had a number of people complete their online learning, so keep that up. And hopefully by Thursday, we can get everybody certified. Okay, today is May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and it's all about decompression theory. And first up is Gene Laureate. Let's see, Gene. Gene was a frustrated snorkeler because he found that when he found something of interest, he never had enough time to properly investigate. Let's see, what else? In 1971, he got certified as an open water diver. He had fun at the National Boy Scout Jamboree in 2010, and he pursued training and achieved assistant instructor in 2016. Dives a lot in the Adirondacks, enjoys his cold water dives, but he enjoyed very much so the Bon Air and Grand Caymans experience. So, Gene, go ahead and take it away. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Good idea. All right, slide one. Thank you very much. If I could go on to the next slide, please.
Right.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. I dumped all this money to come out here on this dive out in Big Blue. I have all my gear put together. I'm sweating my buns off in this wetsuit. And you're going to talk to me about decompression theory? Yes, dear. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. In the previous section, you learned about nitrogen absorption and elimination and decompression sickness. All this information can really be reduced down to three simple things: depth, time, and the rate of ascent. A lot of research has been developed to come up with dive tables and computers to tell you how long you can stay underwater and how to safely return to the surface. There are a variety of factors that complicate monitoring depth and time. For instance, the decompression models were developed for use at sea level. But what happens if you're diving at a lake that is quite a bit above 1 atmosphere of pressure? What happens after you dive and then fly? Because the cabin is always going to be even a reduced pressure. By now you should realize that tracking nitrogen absorption and elimination is one of the most important factors you can do as a diver. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn Bridge was one of the first large-scale examples of decompression sickness. And actually from this, a short while later, they came up with decompression theory. Now, just for a moment, let's look at what a theory is. It's a scientific, accepted general principle or body of principles that offers an explanation of a natural phenomena that is consistent with evidence, data, and experimental results. Theories can be disproven, but it is scientifically impossible to prove a theory. Now, that by itself doesn't sound correct, but if you look at it in the mind's eye of decompression theory, it is so complex because of all of the variables, from human physiology to understanding gas and the physics of it, the mechanisms of that, and the change in your environment where you're diving. So this Brooklyn Bridge, as you can see, had some issues when trying to fabricate the support structure. Looking at the bridge, you can naturally see the iconic towers. Their function, obviously, was to support a set of cables that formed the graceful catenary between the towers. The vertical cables held up the plate, and the end cables fastened the ground. Thus, the only stress on the towers is downward, but an awful lot of downward. The structure weighed over 14,675 tons, and most of that was on the towers. So the foundation had to be quite secure. So the design called for these granite towers to rest on bedrock. In order to limit the span as much as possible, the towers were actually set into the East River's bottom, underwater. So in order to excavate that and get to the bedrock, massive wooden caissons were constructed for the excavation. A caisson is nothing more than an inverted box. And next slide, please. These were set with the opening down so that the river bottom was open to it, and compressed air was used to keep the caisson free of water, to provide air for the workers, and to assist in lifting the bed material out of the site. As the bed dug the riverbed, the workspace moved downward until it reached 80 feet. The men felt pretty sick while they were working, but that illness was nothing compared to the end of the day when they had that rapid lift to the surface. The workers suffered from terrible pains, nausea, and some even died. This phenomenon was dubbed caisson's disease. This ailment would often leave workers permanently crippled, as it did the chief engineer, Washington Roebling. The opening of the Brooklyn Bridge was in 1883. It was a gala event enjoyed by thousands, including my newlywed grandparents. The first scientific approach for decompression didn't happen until 1908, when John Scott Haldane, next slide please, and his colleagues worked for the British Admiralty and published their now famous work on decompression theory. Haldane's work centered around the use of half-time theory to describe how tissues accumulate and release nitrogen. Haldane put forth the concept that tissues could be described by time, ranging from fast tissues to slow tissues, which controlled the rate of how quickly the tissues acquired and released gases. Tissue's half-time, abbreviated as the T-time described in minutes, is a method used to describe the time necessary to allow an amount of gas in a particular tissue to change by 50%. Haldane chose T5, T10, T20, 40, and 75 minutes as tissue times. This was based on what they considered to be the outer limits of diving. But in Haldane's time, bottom time and maximum depths were severely limited not by decompression, but by technology limits. Haldane's method, however, had an immediate impact on diving, as the rate of injury was reduced by half. Even so, the limits of Haldane's theory were soon apparent. Haldane himself recognized the need to continue to improve the theory, as the concept of half-times describing the amount of nitrogen tolerated by a tissue during decompression was increasingly inaccurate at greater depths, and certainly at greater depths with longer bottom times. Over the years, researchers of Swiss, British, and American scientists have worked to expand and improve Haldane's work. His renowned work is now known as the Neo-Haldanean and is still the basis for the modern recreational decompression schedule. This longevity is a great tribute to Haldane and his colleagues' ideas. So at this point, we need to get out of this ancient theory into something a little more modern. And speaking of things that are more modern, Megan would like to take it from here for us.
Alrighty, let's unmute me. So inert gas absorption, elimination, and then saturation and desaturation. Let's talk about soda for a second. our lovely carbonated beverages of all kinds, when we put carbon dioxide into them to make them fizzy and wonderful tasting, they take the gas and put it into a canister and pressurize it and then seal the canister so that the gas can't escape. If you open a can of soda that's cold, you'll have less hiss when you open it, all right? Versus a can or a bottle of soda that's warm, been sitting in your car in the sun, in the heat, and it's hot to the touch, and now you open it and you have a lot of gas that just fizzes off. All right, what does soda have to do with diving? All right, that's the same inert gas that's absorbed into the soda under pressure. That's the same gas, nitrogen, that we're putting in our bodies under pressure and taking that on. So when we breathe in nitrogen, an inert gas that's just kind of there, it's not a waste product like carbon dioxide. It's not a necessary gas like oxygen. It's just kind of there, and our body's got to do something with it when we breathe it in. This is the absorption. All right. So when you are at the surface, your body's kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. We're used to this. We've evolved doing it. We're all good. Now you put pressure on us. 33 feet of salt water, 1 atmosphere. You now are breathing in twice as much nitrogen as you were at the surface. Your body now has twice as much nitrogen to deal with. And okay, it's not too bad short term. And decompression tables say you can stay there for quite a while. I'm not a great expert on tables, so I'm not going to tell you numbers, but for the most part, you can go to 1 atmosphere and your limit isn't nitrogen, it's the gas you brought with you, the air you brought with you. But if you go to, say, 120 feet down to the St. Pete, your bottom time is a lot less because you're now 33, 66, 99, and a little more. So you're four times as much pressure than you were at the surface. You are breathing in 4 times as many molecules of each gas when you go down that deep. So your body has to do something with it. If you get down there and you stay down there, like oil riggers, they go down and they stay pressurized and they're not really coming up quick. They're not coming up at the end of the day. They're down there for days. Your body gets to a point where it's like, yeah, I can't take anymore. But it doesn't have to do anything about it because it doesn't need it. It just breathes it out. But some of your tissues are going to take it on a little quicker, so, like your muscles. Some of them are going to take it on a little slower, like your fat. But that also means that when you come up, those muscles and fat cells are releasing the nitrogen at different rates. So if you're down there for a long time, you kind of get a level, a saturation level that, okay, your body's dealt with what it can take. It just doesn't need any more. If you come up too quick, then you get sick. All right, decompression sickness, and a lot of other things happen when there's too much gases in your system. But if you come up slow, then your body has a chance to deal with it. All right, that's why you have safety stops. That's why you have dive tables that say, okay, well, you've gone to this level and you've gone to this level. Hey, you're kind of at the risk of needing a little more training if you're going to stay down here for longer. That would be decompression diving. We don't do decompression diving. We do no decompression diving. So that's where our education says, okay, we don't know how to deal with this. We didn't bring enough gases with us and enough mixed gases to deal with it. So we're going to follow our dive tables and our dive computer and listen to it and say, okay, we need to go up. All right. Next slide, please. All right, inert gas elimination. So these are listening to those dive tables that people have put theories into, whether it's Navy dive tables, that are well practiced and well tried, or if you're going to be a little more conservative with the SSI dive tables and use a smaller pressure of gas. All right, next slide. There's one more, right? Desaturation. All righty. So, quick discussion about saturation and desaturation. So, recreational diving, we have enough knowledge to say, hey, let me go diving, but I need to come up because I don't have enough resources to deal with staying down too long. I didn't bring enough air with me. I didn't bring enough nitrox, or I didn't bring enough other mixed gases specialty to technical diving. So we use Navy dive tables or dive tables in our computer that are programmed in to say, hey, you went down this far, you were down this long, your body took on this much nitrogen and inert gases that you have to deal with. So picture diving in the Grand Cayman. You are jumping off the boat, going in and down to about 100 feet. Beautiful barrier reef wall. The dive guide brings you up through a couple of swim through coral arches. From 100, you're zigzagging through. You're now up at about 60 feet. You don't need to do the math to figure out what your decompression level is at that point. Your computer's done it for you. But if you don't have a computer, you have to do the math to be safe. All right. So it's knowing that there are things out there like your computer that can help you with desaturation. And then one thing that we should always know is that never dive for 24 hours after scuba diving. All right. Safety first and always. Right after, breathe always. All right. I think next is Jim with our, what's next? Implementation of decompression theory.
All right. So
amazing dive shop owner.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. So, okay. So there's these theories we talked about. So Haldane has this model, right? That model in the early 1900s was with the very first dive table. Now, it wasn't scuba diving, right? This was divers with the big brass helmets on, you know, those cool things that you see in old movies and all that, right? And so they said, okay, someone's going to go down to a particular depth, and then they're going to do a job working, hearts beating fast, breathing heavily. They're going to do the job, and they needed to figure out how long could someone safely do that, right, without getting decompression sickness, right? And you would think it's because, you know, you don't want people getting hurt. You know, I think in 1900 it was more about I don't have enough trained people to get my job done, and if everyone's always sick and dying on me, what good is that? But that's the negative side of me, I guess. So so Haldane had this model, mathematical model was put together into the reality of what could you actually do. In the 50s, well, really right after World War II, they took that model and they said, okay, we've been using the same thing for 45, 50 years now. We have a little better understanding of decompression theory. So to summarize with the M values, there's different tissue compartments you have. The ones that are flooded with blood tend to take on nitrogen very quickly and give it up very quickly, right? Those ones that don't have a lot of blood, like bones, right, would take it on a little bit slower, a lot slower, and then give it up a lot slower. So they said, okay, well, we can apply that theory to the practical knowledge that we've gained from the tables from the last 45 or 50 years and update the tables and then prove them out again with a lot of folks. Right. So the U.S. Navy famously in the late 40s and early 50s would take young, healthy white men, throw them over the side of ships for a while to find an acceptable number of them getting decompression sickness. Right. So that's a bit trite, but that's in general what they did. Right. And then coming out of that was what we know now as the Navy table. So a couple people had asked, hey, where can you get these little plastic tables? When we had printed course materials in the open water courses, you always got a table. And then when technology moved forward, they gave you these little calculator type things. And then nowadays, most people dive with dive computers, right? And the dive computers have various algorithms they use, some based on Haldanian models and some based on bubble gradient models or non-Haldanian models. So all that stuff Bill and Joe will be chatting about. So I don't want to step on Bill's toes because I know you are super excited to tell people all about the Navy tables and dive computers. So with that, Bill, it's all yours.
Slide there, Dave. Now, way back in the day when I first started diving, before the time of computers, we had to pretty much keep an eye on our time, which we actually had a automated watch, at least I did, that as soon as you got into the water, it started. So you're able to do your timing and then your depth gauge. And then the only other limit was actually your pressure gauge and how much air you had. And as Jim was saying, this all started back around the turn of the century, back in the 1900s, when the Navy decided they started to come out with this table on how long people could be down before they started getting this decompression illness. And as a few people said, John Scott Haldane started coming up with these models of how much gas could be taken into different tissues, and it was explained there about how half times. But the interesting thing I found out about Haldane, when he started doing some of his theories and experiments, he was actually using goats. He figured goats are about the same size as people. They probably take on about the same amount of nitrogen as people do. So he was putting goats down at pressure in these caissons to see exactly what would happen to them. So over time, these tables developed by the Navy, and as Jim was explaining, in the 50s, they were throwing guys overboard, figuring exactly what would happen to them at what pressure, what depth. And that's where all these Navy dive tables came from. Jump up into the 70s, and they started coming out with what they called Doppler research, or using Doppler ultrasound. And they were able to track the tiny bubbles, or what they called silent bubbles, within somebody's bloodstream. And they had a better idea of exactly how much nitrogen was dissolved in your bloodstream, how much of it was being off-gassed through your respirations. So they had a little better idea of where things are with these tables of depth versus time. What the Doppler study showed ultimately was that the Navy tables were really close, and the Doppler study just kind of built in an extra safety feature. For years, back in the 70s, instructors used to say, whatever the Navy dive table said, take 10 minutes off of the bottom. So if you could dive at 60 feet for 60 minutes, the suggestion was, for a safety factor, of dive only for 50 minutes as a safety factor. And that's ultimately what the Doppler research started showing. Now, some of the drawbacks with the dive tables for the Navy is that it was very task oriented. They're assuming that somebody was going to dive down to a certain depth, do a task, and come up. So the problem with that is, if you were just to use the Navy tables, let's say you were diving to 100 feet. So you went down to 100 feet for just a few minutes, and then you started coming up. You started, like Megan was saying, you're coming up along a reef, so you're up to 60 feet, gradual increase up to 50. Using the tables, you only take that one part of, you hit 100 feet, and that's the most you can do, and that limits your time. So even though maybe 10% of your time was spent at the maximum depth, you're missing out on the other 90%, and that's where the computer started coming in. In the after party, if you want, we can go over the dive tables. We can run through a few of the scenarios for it. But SSI has the dive tables only as an appendix because, pretty much like Jim was saying, everybody dives computer now. Some of the other drawbacks of the dive tables are you do have to do calculations to figure it out, which can be a bit tricky. And if you're not familiar with it, you can get kind of confused, which could lead into a lot of problems, start getting into a decompression issue. And also, if you plan on going, let's say 50 feet for 30 minutes, and instead you go 60 feet, or you're down for a longer time, you have to start doing all these calculations underwater, which nobody's going to want to do. So then along came the 50s and 60s. The Navy was trying to come up with some kind of computer or some kind of, at least a mechanical device that would be able to help people figure out their calculations for their dive table. It didn't work. Not until the early to mid 80s did they come out with the microprocessor and people were able to actually start using dive computers. And that kind of took out all the guesswork, not as much guesswork, but the calculations. I remember when I first started diving, you had to figure out how deep you went, what repetitive group you came back to, and then you had to make sure you didn't go too deep or for too long. The computers now are doing that for you. It's actually monitoring your nitrogen, and like any computer, you have different kind of things, different abilities that each computer, each manufacturer has. But for the most part, the computers are monitoring what would be the different things that out of Haldane came up, the different tissues and different tissue loading, whether it be a fast load, a slow load, as Jim was saying, bloody. Within your veins, you have a faster nitrogen onload. Within bone, you have a slower nitrogen onload. And your computer can now start calculating this. So if you do go down to, let's say, 90 feet just for a little while, and then you gradually come up, it gives credit for that time that you're spending at what depth. And it takes a lot of the calculation out of it. You still have to be aware of what your own limitations are. And the thing with the computers is it's just a computer. It's not a human. So one person may have one computer, one person may have the exact same, but people are different physiologically. They have maybe a different age, a different health background. A lot of times a computer can't calculate if you're exerting a lot. If the water's cold, it won't calculate that in. So there's a lot of things that the computer can do, but you also have to be knowledgeable about it, what it can't do. And one of the big drawbacks of the computer is that you have to be aware of exactly how to use it. So if you own a computer, whether you buy it at RU for Scuba or wherever, if you buy it, you have to make sure you know how to use it and that you can use it safely. And then the final thing I just want to say is, if two people are diving, you can't share one computer between the two of you. One person can't just go with the gauges and then the other person goes with a computer, because everybody's diving at a different level. Now, I said all of that, and Dave, if you can just advance to the next slide. So you got all those old gauges, now they got the new Maris Genus for great computer there. And all of that takes care of these next few slides. Go ahead, Dave. And there's your dive tables, table 1, table 2. You go on to table 3, I should have on there. And if you have like nothing else to do and you love numbers, I'd be glad to go through that in the after party, or they're also in the appendix for the open water diver for SSI. And I think I had one more slide on there, Dave. Yep, and that's just one of the how to do a repetitive group. And again, we can do that later. And I think that's everything I needed to add there. And next up is Joe. I've been diving with Joe for a while now, and he's probably one of the chillest people I've dove with, and he's a great instructor and just loves to dive and teach. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
So Joe, hang on one second. I think Jim has a poll that he wants to put out.
All right, we're going to try this. I thought this would be fun to see. How many people have learned in their open water course? Did you learn how to use tables? Right. So about 10 years ago, the training agencies made them optional, and just be interesting to see what people gathered. So it should pop up to a little poll right now where you can enter. No one's name's being tracked, so don't worry about it. Just thought it would be interesting to take a look.
So Jim, you asked for tables or electronic, and it was a yes or no question.
Sorry. No, it's tables or electronic dive calculators. So Patty used to have a thing called an ERDPMLGQ, whatever it was. It was a little calculator thing. If you didn't know how to flip a piece of plastic over, you could use a calculator. So, all right. So I think just about everyone, 28 or 38, have voted. So I'm going to give this another 3 or 4 seconds here.
Bill, on
And
your last slide there, that's exactly what our logbooks used to look like, right?
exactly. Exactly. All right. So I'm going to end the polling, and it looks like about, there we go. I'm going to share the results now. So I don't know if you're seeing this because I'm in host mode.
Yes.
Okay. But it looks like roughly 2/3 of people learned how to use them, and about 1/3 didn't. So
The average age of the people watching is older.
there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay.
All right. With that, Joe, take her away.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. And what I'm going to discuss a little bit here is about the different dive profiles and the impact that has on dive theory, decompression theory, I should say. So we're going to discuss a couple of different types of profiles. The whole purpose of this exercise is to enable a better understanding of, as Megan said, saturation and desaturation. I'm going to refer to it as loading and unloading just for the sake of this discussion. Loading is when your body is loading up with the nitrogen. Unloading, obviously the opposite, when you're starting to off-gas the nitrogen, return back to a normal 1 atmosphere level. So for the sake of tonight's discussion, I'm going to just refer to unloading and loading of the nitrogen from our bodies. If you want to plan your dive using the US dive table, as Bill discussed here, there'd be a few drawbacks to consider. First of all, it assumes, as Bill mentioned, that your target depth is attained as soon as you begin your descent. My ears wouldn't appreciate a descent to 100 feet in mere seconds, but yet that's the profile that they used originally. To complete this dive, the complete dive, it assumes you'll be at the maximum depth. Possible if you're fixing a leak at the bottom of an aquarium, I guess. Again, not very likely. The ascent for maximum depth also is 0. Again, not possible or safe for recreational divers. What the dive tables do offer, though, is a way to calculate the rate of absorption of nitrogen into our body. Although there are other methods now available that we consider other factors are more accurate. The possibility of a 0 descent and ascent into a planned depth for a planned amount of time is good only in theory. The reality is, as you drop in and begin a slow 33 feet per minute descent, all the while checking currents, looking for obstructions, maintaining hand signals and communication with your buddy, watching the sights, and plan on where you want to drop in, very well could take several minutes to reach your planned depth, if you do at all. You oftentimes find something cool that takes you away from your intended plan. This happens all the time to me. I see something I just got to take a photo of. I see something cool, I'm going to go check it out. It could be a core formation, turtles, fish, anything that catches your eye. Keep in mind that all the time you're under the surface, you're breathing both partial pressures of oxygen and nitrogen. The deeper you dive, the greater the loading effect is happening to your body. The dive tables assume you're depth at 1 minute and remain there for a whole dive. Reality is that even though you have attained your planned depth, it would have taken you longer to get there. More likely, you won't spend a whole dive at the depth either. You reach the depth, you begin to work your way back up the reef. This working your way back up is more what a multi-level dive profile represented in figure 2 as we show on the screen. Multi-level dive profile, although more typical of a normal dive, is still has some undesired consequences. First, it takes a lot more planning and a lot more math, as Bill stated, a lot more chance for error. It takes a standard dive and breaks into several sections into different depths. Again, a lot more calculations, a lot more math to do, not really too fun to be doing. This way, the loading effect is better represented as the shallower depths, you load less nitrogen. Again, less partial pressure because you're not you're not as deep. You don't have as many atmospheres. Although better, it's still unlikely exploring underwater. It's like an underwater staircase. It's a better representation, but it's less likely to be in exact science. So let's talk a second about why the loading is so important to track. The less loading, the less nitrogen you load simply means the less you need to unload. The unloading takes place at the surface or on a boat. If you took in a lot of nitrogen, you need more surface interval for your body to off-gas the nitrogen. If you use the U.S. Navy chart, you will have assumed loading at a planned depth, even though it's safe to assume you took on a lot less than the chart will tell you. Determine your dive interval. You don't want to miss a dive just because you're off-gassing. You don't need to stay shallower if you don't need to. I mean, everybody wants to get out there in the ocean, out in the water, and you don't really want to have limitations on it, but you need to be aware of your nitrogen loading on successive dives. Again, remember, your surface interval doesn't take you back to the first dive status. Your body does maintain some residual nitrogen. Another great reason is to allow your successive dives to maximize your bottom times. Your successive dives should be planned progressively shallower, as we all know. Depths do again to nitrogen buildup in your body. It takes a while for that nitrogen to work itself out. The surface interval helps tremendously, but it doesn't go back to zero. Fortunately, we have discussed here today some safe diving has become so much easier and safer with the advent of the dive computer. It tracks your actual depth, actual time spent at depths, and nitrogen loading factors. Whether you're on normal gas or nitrox mix, it'll take all that into account, assuming you set it up correctly. When I drop in the ocean, I honestly have a plan that often changes about the second minute I'm under the water. The dive computer allows for this. I dive with an icon. It allows me to download my actual profiles. I can download the computer. I can see my depth. It actually plots a nice chart. Not really necessary, but it's a really nice feature, and it really kind of explains it. You see what your actual depth was. Again, the dive charts show you a theory. My computer shows me reality, what I actually done. So in summary, the U.S. dive tables, maximum depth, time of depth, and surface, everything seems to change. It's really not a true profile how we dive today. The dive computer, though, actually does your tracking, tracks everything more accurately. It's an effective tool, maximize your diving time, maximize your bottom time. So I'm going to be passing off now to Dave Stickley. Dave's another SSI instructor. He's going to talk to us about flying and diving.
Hey, thanks, Joe. I've actually started off a little bit before diving and flying, and that is, when you think about diving and flying, really it's about risk management, right? So there's some things that we know. You've heard them all today already, but we absorb nitrogen, we release nitrogen on each dive, and the way that all happens is unique to you. And it's not only unique to you, but it's unique to you then. So, you doing that same dive a month from now may be different. And it's certainly different than your dive buddy. Everybody's got their own unique dive profile. So even though you're with a buddy, you're not always at the same level. Your ascent rates and descent rates might be different. So the profile is different. The dive tables that Bill talked about are conservative, but they're applied to everybody in all of those situations. So we need to be aware of these things, and we need to manage the risks that maybe can come into play towards decompression sickness. So there's a divers alert network called DAN, and these folks, it's a group of not-for-profit organizations, and they do research and they provide services for divers. So I wanted to get a little bit into some of the research that they've done, and I was thinking that the Divers Alert Network kind of topics might be interesting for us to think about in the future too. But the thing that Bill mentioned earlier was silent bubbles. and they're also known as asymptomatic bubbles. So Dan has been doing research on silent bubbles to try to understand them, who they are affecting, who they show up in, and what they mean. So these silent bubbles are just nitrogen that kind of dissolves into these microscopic gas pockets that get trapped in your body, and they harmlessly diffuse over time. And Dan did studies using Doppler ultrasound, and they found that 60% of the divers on multiple dives had them. They had these silent bubbles, and they didn't exhibit any symptoms of DCS. They also found that these bubbles are bigger than they thought. So, they theorize, yes, you have nitrogen in your system, but these bubbles that they were finding, these silent bubbles, are bigger than they thought. So they're harmless, but what do they tell us? There's a bit of a debate still going on as to, are these silent bubbles an indicator of impending DCS? Are they, some other sort of indicator? So we haven't seen it to actually lead to DCS, but we've seen that there are things you can do to prevent these silent bubbles. So one really good one is do your safety stop. Do your 3-minute, 15-foot safety stop every time, and that reduces the incidence of these safety or silent bubbles. The other thing you can do, you can do your own self-imposed stops at deeper depths, right? So they're not deco stops. You didn't have to do it, but you just took a moment at depth to have your own sort of personal time down there to even reduce those silent bubbles a bit further.
Hey, Dave, if I could build on you for a second
Yes,
there.
please.
So last year I upgraded the computer that I had been diving with for, I don't know, 10 years or so, right? And I happened to a couple of other instructors as well that I put my computer in the most conservative mode that it can go. Right? I figured that's good. I'm in the water a lot, so probably a good idea to be conservative. And it was yelling at me, depending on my profile, to do those deep stops, right? And so sometimes if I was on very deep dives, it would stop for a minute at 80 and then a minute at 40. Other times it would be a minute at 60, whatever it was. And it gets a little upset at you if you don't pay attention to it. So they have built in the conservative mode for my computer, they've built deep stops right into their algorithm. So it's a bubble gradient model, has some long name, but it's based exactly on what you talked about, right? It's all about avoiding these silent bubbles forming into bigger bubbles, which could be problematic. Right. And then I think, Rusty, I think it was yours, right? You were the same type of thing, right? You were coming up in the St. Pete and you're like, what the heck? I'm getting like 8 minutes of bottom time, right? Because when you came, I think you were doing a deep diving class, so you dove twice with an hour out of the water, and you were getting like far, far less time, right? Because you didn't notice this, right? When you were going up, it's like, oh, you missed those 2 deep stops that it wanted you to do because you weren't used to diving that piece of equipment. And it spanked you down pretty hard, taking away 8 or 10 minutes of bottom time. So.
Sure did.
Yep. Yeah, it's good stuff. And,
I think you were like, this computer's broken. I need a new computer.
Come on over to my shop. But I think the thing I wanted to really point out here is that, we theorize the nitrogen absorption and release. They can see these bubbles. It's not imaginary. This is a real thing, and we need to take some measures to make sure that that we manage these risks. Okay, so let's get on to diving and flying. All right, so first off, when we fly, the cabin is pressurized, but it's not pressurized to 14.7 psi, not 1 ATA. No, it's pressurized to somewhere in between 11 and 12 ATA if it's a airliner that's going to like 36,000 feet. So the pressure is less, which provides more opportunity for these nitrogen content to come out of your tissues and bloodstream into bubbles. So we don't want that. So what's the recommendation from Dan? So they say, okay, if you're diving, if you go on a trip and you do a dive and it wasn't a decompression dive and that's all you did, great. 12 hours is fine. For a surface interval, after 12 hours, you can go ahead and fly. But if you're on a multi-day trip with multiple dives, or you're on any dive that required a decompression stop, then you need to really lean towards that 24-hour safety interval. Let's see. So the computer diving piece of this is that the computers do a lot for you, right? On your dive and after your dive. So after your dive, it'll have cool little indicators on the screen. It'll say things like, don't dive, don't fly. I think the point here is that your computer may or may not restrict you to 24 hours before that light goes off. If you always just stick with 24 hours after your last dive, your computer will be happy, you'll be happy, and your risks will be managed. Okay, some other interesting things around post-dive considerations. So flying, we talked about that, but we also need to think about other things. So mountaineering and ziplining, they both happen at altitude. So we need to think about, after diving, do we want to be going to higher altitudes higher than 1,000 feet? Some interesting ones. Okay, so deep tissue massage. Who knew that would be a consideration? The reason they brought this one out was because with deep tissue massage, you have increased blood flow, which could affect how things come out of solution. And the other thing is, you can actually confuse some of the DCS symptoms, because deep tissue massage can actually make you sore. Hot tubbing, we learned with the general gas law that temperature is a factor, right, on how much of a gas a fluid can absorb, right? So if we mess with the temperature, we can have bubbles come out of our bloodstream. And my favorite, intense partying. You scuba divers are intense partiers, I know, but if you're going to do that, just make sure you drink a lot of water before you do that. So you don't want to be dehydrated, which is what will happen with alcohol. Okay, so I wanted to talk for a minute about an experience we had where we actually had to do some risk management. So when we were in Statia, there's a volcano called the Quill. And Brian Smith, I gave you some credits down there in the bottom. You can see that. This is your picture. So we were going to hike the Quill. So we dove Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday we were going to hike the Quill, and Sunday we were going to take our flights home. So the Quill is at an elevation of 1,900 feet above sea level. So we were going to do the hike on Saturday at 9 a.m. So our last dive on Friday was, I think 3 o'clock we ended up out of the water. So we had a surface interval of 18 hours. And, we assessed that risk. It wasn't quite 24 hours, but we agreed that, that risk was acceptable for the altitude that we were going to. And we planned that hike. But we had an idea, though. The idea was, it came up on Friday. We were enjoying our diving experience so much that we said, hey, how about we plan a dive on Saturday morning and then hike the Quill in the afternoon? But then we took a look at that a little more closely, and we said, well, we do have the 24 hours surface interval to our flights, but we only have about 4 hours surface interval before hiking 1,900 feet. So we decided that probably wasn't a great risk to take, and we instead offered an option. So People want to hike the volcano in the morning, great. People want to go on a morning dive, great. So, sometimes you just need to think through these scenarios that, the risks can be managed if you just kind of give it a little bit of thought. So I think that's it for me. Jim, over to you for the specialties.
So Pat, you still happy you went on the dive instead of hiking up 2,000 feet? Yeah. Oh, she's muted, but I'm going to say yes, yes.
Oh,
That's a
wait.
thumbs up.
Well, we can unmute all.
There you go.
There you go.
Yes, I was happy. It was a good dive. And I saw how Kelly loved her hike, so.
Thanks, Pat. That
Well,
was a rough one.
Quill all the way.
Hey, I'm too
Exactly.
old for that nonsense.
I would have went diving if I chose again.
So, Dave, I forgot. Do I have slides or?
You do.
Okay, there you go. So yeah, so after I think it was last Tuesday's session, a bunch of people had asked about various specialties and other things that could be done until the water opens up again. So I pulled the slides and we ran out of time on Thursday, so I thought I'd go over them today. So there is a whole rash of specialties, the ecology specialties, that starts off with marine ecology, and just as the name describes, that's what it is. And then that's kind of setting the basis. And then it goes into things like fish ID, coral ID, and then gets into particular critters, such as turtles or sharks and rays, etc. So it's deeper dives for a few of the let's call them the more sexy things out there, right? Everyone loves a turtle after all, right? And then there's a bunch of specialties around diving knowledge, science of diving probably being the biggest one there, but nitrox would fall into that as well. And so neither the ecology or the diving knowledge specialties, equipment as well, so I've got to mention the equipment one as well, they have no water components, right? So as we are locked down, right, if people want to go on sessions like this. And then we have some pool-only specialties, and or I shouldn't say it can be taught in the pool. Let me put it that way. And buoyancy and the photo course fall into that. Then there's what you'd more traditionally think of the open water specialties like deep diver and navigation and those type of things. And I have no idea how we're going to be handling things this year until we have an all clear. So I have no idea to tell you when we're going to start diving for real, right? So we were planning to start in about 3 weeks, I guess it would be, or 4 weeks would be. Today, 4 weeks from today, yep, with the dry suit course, the open water dives for those down in the quarry. But there's several other specialties that are all about unique pieces of gear, right? So dry suit's probably the most popular there. There's some tips and techniques you have to use or have to learn to use a dry suit safely. But there's things like full face masks, right? And then there's a bunch of specialties that we really don't do a lot with. We can, but they're the overhead environment specialties around ice diving, the advanced wreck penetration, etc. So we really don't do too much with those. Like I said, we can. Don, I don't know how you feel, but I've done ice diving, and I'm ready to hand it on to our other 10 instructors. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I think my ice is when the water's in the 50s.
Yeah, I think your ice is like you're sitting on the beach in Bonaire with a nice cold drink.
Yeah.
All right. I did have a question come in, and it says the buoyancy course online only. There's an online component, but it's a pool. It can be done in the pool. All right. So the pool or confined water specialties are buoyancy, underwater photography, and there's some specialized ones as well. All right. So I think that was it. Was there another slide on that, Dave? I forgot because I pulled them out from the other day.
Yeah. So you had some of the
Yeah. That was the other thing people had questions on if you didn't come up through the SSI system. So you know, all these training agencies are in a recreational scuba diving council. So the agencies all get together and they define standards for courses, right? So in an open water course, you must do X, Y, and Z. But then the training agencies, they say, okay, this is how we want you instructors to teach things. So for instance, with SSI in one of the out of air drills and open water courses, right? If you have air and you're going to be sharing your air with someone who's out of air, right? What we teach is you take your primary regulator out of your mouth, you give it to the diver while you grab them, and then you go to your alternate. The reason being is that teaching it that way would make it work in all gear configurations, because sometimes people have an alternate air source that's integrated into their BC power inflator. And so you have to do it that way because the hose is about 8 inches long, right? So, so you would teach it that way. And that's just how SSI decides to teach it. Other training organizations will teach it differently. Well, one thing that's unique that SSI does is they have recognition levels, right? And so it's nice that some people may have a lot of certifications. They may not have a lot of dives, right? So I can understand somebody who becomes an open water diver and they like the organization that they were taught, the shop that they were taught, or an individual instructor. So they want to, you know, hang out and build their skill sets and their knowledge by taking a couple specialty courses, right? Well, really you need a combination of both training and experience. So SSI has these recognition levels. So the first is a specialty diver. And what that means is that you have at least 12 dives under your belt and you have 2 specialties. So this course, for instance, will go for one of them, right? And then you get a recognition card that is electronic. And if you want a printed card, give me a shout. There's a couple bucks. I have to buy them from SSI. Then advanced open water is the next recognition. And most training agencies have something called advanced open water, where it's an experiential course, right? And what I mean by that is under the guidance of a dive professional, you usually go do 5 different things: a navigation dive and a deep dive, and then 3 other things, usually a night dive and then a couple other things, whatever you'd like to do. And there's a little bit of knowledge development, but it's more about going into on a dive in an area that you may never have gone before. Maybe you've never done a night dive, so you learn some things about night diving, and then an instructor will bring you down. SSI said, you know, the word advanced should mean something, right? And so you need to have 24 dives under your belt, but you also need 4 specialty courses, right? So you need both a level of training that builds your knowledge as well as the experience to go with it. Right? And then Master Diver, once again, other training organizations have their version of Master Diver. Master Diver in the SSI system is 50 dives and 5 specialties, and one of those specialties has to be dive stress and rescue. Right? So that's recognition card, but also for experience, right? They have a Century Diver, Silver Diver, Gold, Platinum, and Platinum Pro that is just counting your number of dives, right? And so those cards, when you go to a dive shop down south or over in Asia or whatnot, and you whip out the Platinum Pro 5000 diver card, right? You got some street cred, right? So that's more about just your total number of dives, not tied to any additional classes you may have. And I'm not quite sure that the SSI website kind of explains that well enough. So hopefully I explained it a little better than the website did. So, excuse me, the other thing I should mention too, while we're all in lockdown here, just like what SSI did for the science of diving course, they waived all fees around the science of diving course. And they let each dive shop then determine whether or not they want to charge some kind of an instructional fee. We didn't, right? So we figured if SSI has gone out of their way to waive any of their charges, why should we? Plus, it's kind of nice. I mean, we're dying to go diving too, right? Any of the other specialties, we're reducing the price because SSI is reducing the price. They're not waiving the price for things. But on many of these, thanks, Dave. Many of these courses, there's a discount. So I have not updated the website yet. But anywhere, you can think of anywhere from about 25 to $50 off is what SSI is passing along to us. So we're passing that along to you. So if anyone's interested, just give us a shout or throw us an email and we can go through that stuff. And I don't think I missed anything. I kind of talked through that, didn't I? Yeah. So back to you, Dave.
Okay, any other, since actually, let me unmute everybody. Does anybody have any questions? Oops, hold on. Unmute all. Does anybody have any questions on the specialties?
This is Raphael here. Is there any way you can get certified to use a dripper?
Uh-oh. Jim, did you make that up?
I did not. I heard certified to use, and then that's when it broke up.
A dragger?
Drager. So we do have an instructor down in Penyan who's a rebreather instructor, and it's model specific. So I would have to contact him to see which rebreather he's certified for. I think it could very well be the Drager.
Thank you.
You guys are all echoing bad.
All right, I'm gonna just mute for a second. Okay, to wrap this up, for Thursday, we're going off script. So these first 3 sessions have been, pretty much following along with the content exactly that's in the book and trying to give our insights on those things. And we're going to do the same sort of thing for Thursday, but differently, in that we're not going to give you theory. We're going to give you actual practice. So on Thursday, it's going to be primarily about equipment. And we have, Mr. Abel, if you want to, why don't you go ahead and tell them what we're going to do on Thursday?
Perfect. So we're going to go on a field trip on Thursday. We're going to start at the compressor, work our way through the cylinders and right through the first stage down to the second stage, and do a little bit of what it is and how it works and what each piece is involved with. I'm going to have Captain Rusty here as my assistant helper, and we're just going to slowly take everybody on a little field trip and work our way around the shop. Show how we service stuff and how we what's involved and what makes it tick and what makes it safe and all that.
So we're going to see if Don can like walk and chew gum at the same time, because he's going to be describing how regulators work. So when you take that breath in and breath out, what's happening? He's going to be explaining that while taking regulators apart and showing you all the bits in the inside.
And if anybody knows me, I'm not going to stop for a potty break.
Wow, that is dedication.
So it's a 5-minute class.
Right. And then we'll see if we have time afterwards. Jim might do some things in the shop too to show you some things, but that's our plan for Thursday. All right, and I think that's it. Yep. Woohoo! Party. I'm
If I
muting
could
again.
jump in for just 1 second.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to pitch React Right to you guys because I think it is a class that helps you look from yourself and others, and it's the next step. It's something I think everybody should have, whether you're a diver or not. So React Right is a good online learning class. You go through a lot of the information kind of like you did with Science of Diving, and then you have an instructor you can ask questions to, and when we can finally get together, you can practice your CPR with some feedback. You can learn how to administer oxygen to somebody who's having an emergency, and you can learn how to use a AED. All skills that I think everybody needs across the board, whether they're diving or whether they have a cardiac event in their home or in their place of business. So if you guys would like that, reach out, leave a message or a chat comment, and we can get you guys signed up and get you guys started, because it's a good online learning class while everybody's still kind of down and got some time on their hands, before the world starts spinning again.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, right now with us being in lockdown, it would be real easy for a lot of folks to get the specialty diver certification and potentially the advanced open water diver. All right, unmuting.
And I want to throw out
Okay, so
a thought that I came across later is another reason to know the dive tables is drive. Is also I had my computer the battery and stuff was dead in it. You really need to know for emergency purposes. If you're on a trip somewhere, your computer gets lost or stolen. If you got the knowledge behind the dive table, still save you. Why I'm getting an echo. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. So the reason to know the Navy dive table and standard theory stuff behind it. Still works as a backup.
Is everybody on?
yeah, we're getting the echo. So how about I mute everybody again and just unmute yourself to talk.
Yeah.
Okay. So Joe, I only got bits and pieces what you said. Can you just run through that quickly one more time?
Yeah, I'll try it again. A good reason to know the dive tables and be comfortable if you had to do it. If you had a computer failure, I got an integrated system, so my computer talks to my tank for air pressure. If you're on a trip somewhere and your battery dies or it gets stolen or falls overboard, it's always good to know the dive tables. If you ever had to refer back to them, it's kind of, you don't need a computer to use them. So it takes a little bit of practice to play with them. Any of the divers, any of the instructors and stuff, if you're unsure of it to anybody who's not, just ask. It's a little complicated getting started, but once you work through a few of them, it makes sense. For me, it took me a little bit to understand how to work through the dive tables. But even when I'm out diving, it's in the back of my head. I kind of know what my computer is doing. I know why it's doing it. And it really does help to understand if you ever had to go back to the dive tables. It's just a little comfort level knowing that you don't have to have your computer. It is nice. It adds a lot of benefits, but it's not a showstopper for me.
Great, thanks, Joe. Jim, I'm putting a question into the chat that Jammer asked earlier. Can you take a look at that? Hey, Jim, you're muted.
I mute myself on my little headset, but the system chose to mute me as well. So apparently pressing my little button doesn't undo the system. So Jammer's question for later. What was SSI saying about do your deep dives first, that dive computers will get false info if you don't? So I'm not quite remembering what the materials say about, but in general, you want to do deep dives first, so you have the lowest amount of nitrogen in your body, so you can get the longest bottom time. Jammer, do you remember exactly what they were saying in there? Because I don't remember. It's probably been honestly 2 years since I read through all the materials. But in general, it's about, you start off your day, you have very little nitrogen loading in you, and you're going on a deep dive so you can maximize your bottom time.
Jim, I think I read a little bit about that. What it was is the algorithms in the profiles for the computer, they're designed for maximum saturation nitrogen and then slowly reducing it. And if you were to go on another deep dive, because you got fast and slow tissues, it makes it too complicated for the computer to adjust for the proper amount of nitrogen your body is adapting. Because if you went deep, again, it makes the computer, the algorithms, it didn't take that into account.
Yeah.
What throws the nitrogen levels could be off.
So they made an assumption that you're always doing your deepest dive first, and you know what assumptions do?
Yeah.
They bend you and me.
It gets you nicknames.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
actually, in a couple of years, it's actually changing with the development and the way computers are going now. It's really, they're starting to change that rule around. They haven't done it yet, but Dan was doing a study on it. I went to a class at one of the trade shows, and it was kind of interesting, but it's still old school. Anywhere you go diving, you're always going to do your deepest dives first, and then you're going to do your shallower dives. It's just one of those things, but they are trying to prove the scientific that it doesn't really exist. But I think that it's a good practice.
Yeah. So computers, remember, are just instruments. They're not your brain. Right.
Right.
So, so one of my favorite computer stories is Don and I were diving. I think it was Indonesia, and I remember we were diving, and we go on these dive trips. We're diving 5 times a day, and so we had this great drift dive, stunningly clear water. You know, not an inch of the bottom. Didn't have the gorgeous coral all over it, fish galore, and all that. And you work your way up from the bottom. So we were going from 80. When I'm pleasure diving, I like doing a max depth about 80 usually, because it really maximizes your use of nitrox for maximizing your bottom time. And then you just work your way up, right? And so I'm keeping looking at my computer, and it says, okay, you have 2 minutes left before your no decompression, last dive of the day. And so I'm working my way up, and I'm getting to like 20 feet, right? And it's starting to throw me into decompression at 20 feet, right? And so actually maybe it was 21 feet. And it said that you have to go to 20 feet, and then you have to hang at 20 feet. So I went up like 6 inches, right? Then all of a sudden it said, oh yeah, you're out of decompression. You can stay there for 99 minutes, right? So, you can't let the computer do your thinking for you. And so that's probably an example. What I saw was the computer, when I put it in most conservative mode, was trying to protect me the most it could, right? And it was just, I was diving so much in so few days. We probably had, in a week, we probably had 30 dives in a week, something like that, that it was just saying, okay, these guys are nuts. They're diving all the time. I'm going to really back them up, right? And so it was just, I think, an issue with that algorithm, where at like just below 20 feet, it wanted me to throw me in decompression and then give me unlimited time when I went up 6 inches.
Well, that reminds me of the story of the St. Lawrence River. We were talking about it the other day. I forget what his name is now, but he was down to 89 feet, said to do a deep dive at 80 feet for 10 minutes or something, and he was low on air, and instead of saying, hey, I need to bring myself up and not just go with that, he stayed down there, and luckily we didn't have any problems. But yeah, you want to use a little bit of common sense.
You're stealing my story from the rescue class. No, there was a computer malfunction. There was a brand of computer that we don't carry that had a bad run of sensors in them, and so this gentleman had buddied up with a friend of his who he's dove with for years. And so they get down to the bottom of the wreck, 90 feet. They're just in the water a few minutes. His computer is telling him you're in decompression. Okay, so obviously that's not true, right? The first dive of the day, no nitrogen loading whatsoever, but the computer itself is malfunctioning, right? And so what he did, he got locked on that, saying, oh, I don't want to get bent. I'm going to follow what this computer is going to do, right? And so this computer told him to go to 80 feet, right? So do a deep decompression stop at 80 feet for 20 minutes. So that's what he was doing. And his buddy decided that he didn't want to hang around him.
By himself.
Yeah. So he just left him alone and went and enjoyed the wreck. So, and then, so when we go on dives, normally one of us will go down first with people, and we buddy up other instructors and whatnot. And then there'll be a person called the sweeper, who's the last one on the wreck, just to make sure that there's nobody else down there. If anyone gets any issues, you have the pony tank with you and all those type of things, right? So, okay. So I was sweeping on that dive, and I see this guy sitting there looking at his computer. I give him the okay. He gives me shrugs back, which is not what you want to see at 80 feet. Are you okay? Shrug. Okay. Points to his computer. Something's wrong with the computer. So go over, take a look at it. And at this point, I don't know the whole story. All I see is that it put him into decompression. He has like 2 more minutes at 80 feet, right? So I say, what's your pressure, right? Holds up his gauge, 400 PSI, right? So, okay. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to do this? We're probably going to have a long decompression up. I have 2,200 in my tank. We're good. And so get him back on the boat safely. And then just ask, well, what was going on? He goes, well, I didn't want to get bent. Okay, fair enough. How long were you down? Well, it happened as soon as I got down. And it was just the person was locked on not wanting to get bent, right? And so they had their perception narrowed to that one thing, right? And so that's very common for somebody when there's a situation underwater that is avoidable of not thinking through your options. So he didn't panic, right? But he didn't run through, well, what should I do? Does this make sense? Is this instrument I have telling me the truth here? And what do I do in case that, it's not telling me the truth? How do I handle the situation? A reasonable diver would have went to the buddy saying, hey, I have to go. Buddy brings you back up, or at least you buddy with somebody who's going up, and you live again to dive another day. All right, so I guess you just can't take the rescue class now. You hear the story.
Jim, wasn't that the musky lunge that was like, we had all kinds of issues happening on that dive?
What could they be?
I think Eric and Chelsea, I think you were with me on that one, right?
There was quite a few things happening.
Yeah, with the person you were just talking about?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. We were discussing that, and then you brought the story up.
Yeah, and that crazy current you had when we cut between the 2 parts of the hull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Joe and I demonstrated that you could come up from 90 feet in about 30 seconds and no problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a wonderful dive.
Yeah, the musky lunge.
We've not been back there since.
So those dives and more are coming up on the weekend of.
Those dives are some of the best. I like those dives.
Yeah.
Good dive.
Yeah. Well, talking about dives up in the Thousand Islands, I saw on Facebook that the Gaskin, which is a wreck sitting at about 60 feet right in front of the Brockville Harbor there, that there's a 3D model of that available now, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, Dave put that on Facebook for us, on our Facebook
page. It's on your Facebook. Yeah. It is really cool. I didn't get a chance to look at the other ones. Apparently there's a bunch of 3D models of the wrecks over there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. The last time when I was talking about the Lake Ontario National Marine Sanctuary that's proposed, those type of things become available then, right? So first of all, they're going to find a lot more wrecks because NOAA's data on the bottom of what's in Lake Ontario is from 1970, and whenever they use side scan sonar, it was very low resolution compared to what we have today. If they saw something that was just a lump, they didn't think it was a ship, they just put it in the wrecks and obstructions database, and there's 12,000 hits in Lake Ontario for wrecks and obstructions. So they're going to come back with, probably 2023, hopefully, they'll come back and do a side scan of the park and or the preserve, and hopefully they'll find many more interesting things to dive on.
They're going to scan that entire area?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
The boat that is strangely or small world enough, the NOAA boat that actually does that surveying work is based out of Seattle and is commanded by Ben Evans, who went to high school with my wife, who grew up in my town, and whose dad is the county historian for Wayne County.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's chomping at the bit to get this thing approved, so he can bring his boat around and then basically be based out of his hometown for a summer. So, all right, I'm gonna look through other questions here.
I didn't see any other ones in the chat.
So Brian, yes, you're correct in the manufacturer. All right.
Somebody
Shall
brought
we
up a good
call
point,
her a
though,
night?
Jim. One question,
Oh.
if you know the answer to it, why don't our computers track temperature?
They do.
Yeah.
As well, they do, but do they factor that into the nitrogen absorption?
So my personal computer does. I know that is when I
Yours
set
does.
it
Okay, yours
into
does. Okay.
yes, when I set it into max conservative mode, yeah, it does all that stuff. I've only read there's a paper. So the algorithm that's in my computers, this computer has been around in market about a year now. I read a paper. I honestly did not understand quite a bit of it. The gentleman who wrote the article has lots of initials after his name, lots of degrees, and it was published in the proceedings of the Hyperbaric Society of whatever, and so they went to a lot of math. But they were talking about this particular algorithm is a bubble gradient model, and how they've proven it out in the lab and with all the test divers and all that kind of stuff. But it's one of the most complete ones. And it happened to be Mares, but they then licensed it to most of the other manufacturers of the higher end, like the Shearwaters and the higher end computers.
And I was fortunate enough to spend time with the Italian person that came up with this for an hour at a trade show, and was explaining to him that we like the algorithms of the other, and I got literally yelled at in Italian of how better. He sent me about a 6-page document that made, a little bit of sense, but wow, it was way beyond my educational belief. So
yes, if anyone wants to study dive theory at the graduate level, I'll be happy to send the paper on to you.
Yeah. And then you can bring it back to me in layman's terms.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds interesting, Jim.
There you go. And so some of these things on modern computers, so unless somebody is diving a lot, right? There's unless you're looking for a particular feature like a huge display like this one has, just about any computer is gonna meet your needs, right? And it comes down to more personal preference, right? So I like this style because it's huge, and I'm getting a little bit older, and I have my cheaters. Knock on wood, I don't need glasses yet, no bifocals or anything. But I like a nice big display, right? And it also has some color cues to me. So this one works for me, right? Other people may not need all those features, and that's fine. So there's black and white ones that are big. There's more watch style ones. They all have, do the same basic function. Some have more bells and whistles. So there are things in this computer that I'm never going to use. So I can change M values. I'm not going to do that. I'm not an expert in decompression theory, right? But if I were a technical diver where I'm willing to take more risk to extend my bottom time, I can override the base algorithms. Me personally, I have no desire to ever do that. I go to max conservative. So.
Yeah, that's really one of the big differences between our shop and a lot of the other shops. We don't really have a technical part of the shop.
Not yet.
Right. There you
Not
go.
yet.
Not yet.
Well, with that said, I think we're going to get into this more on Thursday, right? So this could be a good segue. But some gear configurations that would have been considered technical gear, right, is now getting to be mainstream, right? So back this summer when we were in the Philippines, right, a few people bought backwing BC. So instead of a traditional BC that's worn like a jacket, there's a metal plate with a much smaller inflatable part behind you. And I'll show one off on Thursday. And so it seemed like all the dive professionals were wearing those over in the Philippines. And I think half of our folks had them, right? It's like you're wearing nothing. It's a much more open feeling. Right. And so we'll talk about advantages and disadvantages of something like that. But just a few years ago, 5 years ago, that would have been considered a technical piece of gear, right?
Yeah.
A full face mask, right? So there's more and more people diving with full face masks. it's a little bigger view of what you can see out of them. Your face stays dry. So if you're diving around here, say now when the water is 43, 44 degrees, right, it keeps you a bit warmer. And then you can have the ability to add in comm systems so you can talk to other people and all that. I kind of like not having people talking to me underwater, but you know, you can do that. So, so that once again, a few years ago, that would have been considered technical dive gear, and it's not. Heck, going back 20 years ago, nitrox was called voodoo gas, right? And it's in most resorts, it's what you default to, right? So you can maximize the investment you made in your vacation, right? If you're going on a dive vacation, you know, with using nitrox, and we talked about it last time, right? You can get the equivalent of 3, 4, 5 dives, right? There's no way when we went to Manila or to the Philippines that we could have done 5 dives a day on air. I mean, we were getting a huge amount of time. We went down to Statia, right? What was our average dive time? An hour 10, an hour 20, something like that in a 60 to 70 foot range, right? Can't do that on air, right? So a few years ago, voodoo gas, oh, it's going to kill everybody, voodoo gas. No, it just requires a little more education about how to use it safely. So,
Jim, there's a question in the chat from Michelle.
okay. Do you do extended range specialties? So we do a couple of them. So we do some gas blending. We do some of the advanced rec stuff. So we normally recommend a couple of folks. We have a good friend in Syracuse that runs a technical shop, and he's really good. So we're more of a recreational shop. I kind of describe to people that I like to swim around, see fish and wrecks, you know, and, you know, rebreathers are super cool and all that, but, you know, it gets to a level of risk that, and the amount of training you need, that I'm happy where I am. But that's a personal decision for folks. So, Brian had a comment saying, would there be more of an overview of the fringe stuff? I think you're talking about next week, or on Thursday. Yeah, we'll get into it. So like pros and cons, his examples of full face mask. Is it better for fogging? Yeah, they don't fog. You don't have to treat them. They don't fog. And we'll explain why. That makes you come back on Thursday.
Yeah, I would say.
Go ahead, Don. Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say, probably I would think the next thing that we may get into would be like the DPVs, the little scooters and stuff like that. Jim and I looked at a few of those. So it's different, more recreational based diving.
Yep. I would people ask, say, you know, do you do a lot of nitrox diving, you know, out of the shop? Well, certainly we can mix nitrox, but where we are, you know, down south in Scottsville, we have a quarry, 25 feet. You're not going to use nitrox there. And then on Lake Ontario, the St. Pete, right, is sitting down at 100, well, depending on the year, 117 to 123, depending on the water level. But, you know, so yeah, you could use nitrox on that. I have to do the math, but you're probably looking, oh, hold on, I can do the math. If I didn't drop the card on the floor, you probably have to do about a 26% nitrox mix that could get you a couple more minutes. You know, I would rather just do a 2-tank dive and, you know, with a surface interval, I think. And then we have a wreck, the landing craft wreck, that's sitting upright and starts in 55, goes down to 80, but there's, it's a cool wreck because it's upright, but, you know, it's not that big. So the extra 15, 20 minutes you get in nitrox doesn't make much sense. And then we have the couple of training sites, which are relatively shallow. So we don't do a lot with nitrox here. If we were up in the Thousand Islands, yeah, we would probably just include that in the open water course and make it a combo course. But as we sit here in our area, there's just not a lot of nitrox, need for nitrox. And how did I miss Jeff Munn's picture this whole time?
I saw that. I was an ass.
I see Daryl's in the Salt Pier in Bonaire. Very nice.
Where's Jeff at?
Just, do you see Jeff?
No, I can't see him.
So
I see the.
Roll to your
he looks
right.
a little different.
I'm listening.
Oh, wow. That's
He's
nice,
ready
Jim.
to dive.
Nice.
All right. So Dave, I think we may call it a night.
I think it's a wrap. So Thursday we'll be back on with Don and some gym time and look at equipment.
Well, thank you, Dave. Have a nice night. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
See you guys Thursday.
Good night.
All right. Take care.
Hey, Dave, before you go,
Good night.